This is Geek Gab with your host, Dornall and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Geek Gab for Saturday, February 11th, 2022. Dornall, how was your week?
Hey, it's been a good week, slow and quiet. I tell you what, I'm very excited. At home, we have beautiful weather. This is that late, that early spring fake out that we get up in the Pacific Northwest. After a full week of work at the home office, I'm ready to spend a little time outside this afternoon. How about you?
Um, well, what I can remember of my week is going, mostly well. Yeah, I've got um, I am hurriedly trying to finish my trying to finish the Shadowrun games. Unfortunately, the first, and I'm not talking about pen and paper here, folks. I'm talking about the
No, that would be
Shadowrun.
dreadful. We've tr-
Psh,
we've tried the pen and paper shadow run. That don't
hush
work.
you. The Oh yeah, you tried sixth edition. That's why sixth edition is, well, it's horrible. Is what it is. Um, but yeah, the the Shadowrun video games that were released by Harebrained Schemes that I was in on the Kickstarter for the second and third one, um, which is Shadowrun Dragonfall and Shadowrun Hong Kong. Um, and Shadowrun Returns was the first one. They're awesome games. They're a lot of fun, and I'm trying to get them finished because you know, some other good games are coming out real soon now. And plus, I just found out that some other games that I've wanted to play I just haven't had the money to buy are now available for free on the through the Ultimate Game Pass on the Xbox. So I've downloaded those and been shocked to realize that some other games I wanted to play and or buy are coming out also on the Xbox Game Pass. And it's just, it's more gaming than I have time to finish. And I've heard people complaining about this for years, that as adults they don't have time to finish what they want to finish. And now I'm here and it sucks. I hate it. But Hogwarts Legacy released yesterday on the Xbox. Um, and of course, you know what's happening with Hogwarts Legacy. We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to waste
You
time about
you
it.
you meaning the audience? I only have a vague notion of what's going on there.
Oh, you haven't heard?
Does it have to do with J.K. Rowling's?
Yeah,
But
everybody's upset at J.K. Rowling, but the game is so popular on Twitch that all of the Twitch streamers who want to skip it to appease their audience are being forced to play it because it's so darn popular that like all the number one streams on Twitch right now are Hogwarts Legacy.
mm,
And all of the sites that would like to boycott reviewing it are not only having to review it, they're having to give it nines and 9.5s and whatever because it's so actually really honestly good. So
wow.
so they're being inundated with hate mail and hate mobs. but they're having to give it good reviews and having to play it on Twitch because it's just that darn fun.
I
So
I'm kind of hurting to hear that people still make fun games.
yeah, I know. It's kind of surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Um, and then of course I'm doing work, uh, and having a lot of fun doing the work. Um, because despite some major setbacks that happened this week, the rebuilding that's going on uh, is uh, after you have a setback and something falls apart on you, just completely shatters and sinks into the ground, then you kind of have to uh, turn around and fix it. And so, the rebuilding that's been going on has been going kind of well. And I haven't rebuilt it in the sense of, yeah, we're done, everything's cool. But, the rebuilding that's going on has gone well. It's gone well. So I'm I'm excited.
Great. It's been a slow week in tabletop gaming news, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, really slow week. I mean, it's not like Wizards of the Coast hasn't stabbed themselves in the foot again. Yeah, they stabbed themselves in the foot again. Kyle Brink. And let's be honest, he was trying to pander, but he was trying to pander in a panic. And when you pander in a panic, something slips out. So it just.
What happened?
He went on a podcast that is called Three Black Hobbits.
Okay.
And I don't know why they call it Three Black Hobbits. I have no opinion on why they call it Three Black Hobbits because I haven't read up on the podcast and I've never listened to the podcast. But on this particular episode, the two podcasters who were interviewing Kyle Brink, who's the executive producer of Dungeons and Dragons for Wizards of the Coast, both of them were African American, as we used to say back in the 90s, in ye olden days.
Sure.
And he was trying to talk about how diversity is important to Wizards of the Coast. And then he slipped in, he was talking about how all the employees, they were trying to get them more diverse and stuff. And then he said, well, in past years, we've assumed that the players of Dungeons and Dragons have been typically white and male, and that hasn't been the face of our player base for a long time. Now, Kyle Brink, I should say, is also white heterosexual male. And he said that straight white males haven't been the face of our player base for a long time. And I think it is healthier for the hobby for people like me to leave the hobby as quickly as possible. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that is fairly close to the exact quote.
That is such a weird thing to say. What did you say? Pandering while drunk? Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pandering while panicked, I think.
Pandering while panicked, I see.
Um,
Well, if that isn't a toxic ideology, I don't know what is.
so that's been a bit of a big controversy running around. People are upset. And then, of course, there's the usual bunch of people who are upset that people are upset and trying to say, no, 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 it's all okay. He wasn't talking about straight white male players leaving the hobby. He was talking about straight white male game designers leaving the hobby. And so it's all okay. I I
D-
confess I don't see how that all makes it okay. Sorry.
Race baiting. The only winning move isn't to play.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't want to talk about it anymore, but yeah,
Well,
that's the big news in gaming this week, folks.
you got the gist of it out. Wizards of the Coast are still a bunch of idiots who are part of the death cult. They hate you. Don't give them your money. There you go.
They I just why did they want to do this so soon after the OGL thing that tanked? I mean, Paizo is selling like 8 times their usual sales rate. They're selling books so fast they literally can't keep them in stock. They're reprinting their manuals, but they can't reprint them fast enough to sell them all, to meet all the sales requests they're getting.
Well,
Oh, this is what I wanted to say. You guys remember Russian Bioshock, also known as Atomic Heart?
I've heard the name.
It's coming out as part of the Game Pass. So if you have Game Pass on your Xbox, you can get it for free and play it for free. You don't have to worry about pre-ordering and stuff. You can just try it out.
Sounds good.
So I've got that set up to come online whenever it gets released. Also, I may have an inside line on getting a new Xbox X, so we'll see what happens.
You
That
have
may
had
have
quite a
actually
week.
come in the mail today.
The inside line or the Xbox X One XX One. Boom.
Plus. Oh, wait, that's a PlayStation thing. Sorry, my bad. I'm having to search on the web while I was talking, so I finally got to that point and we had already moved on to something, so I wanted to go back because I wanted to give people the news. If you've got an Xbox and you want to play Atomic Heart, I've already pre-installed it. I downloaded it and pre-installed it this week, so it's ready to go. I think it's coming out on the 13th. It's ready to go. And I also found out that the last two, Modern Warfare 2 and the one before that, are part of the EA Pass that you get as part of the Game Pass on Xbox. They're available to just install and play now. So the single player campaigns, I mean, because I don't do multiplayer. So I think we're done. I think we've spent 15 minutes on this, and it's time to
I, I
introduce
was
our
I was
guest.
I was debating on letting you go for another couple minutes to hit the 15-minute mark exactly. But yeah, that's it. That's it for news in Geek BS this week. Uh, so our guest, Daddy Warpig, you met this guest at FanX. Care to do the introductions here?
Sure. Um, Christopher, and I'm hoping I'm getting this right because it was awesome. Christopher Ruocchio.
That's it.
Nailed it.
Boom.
Got it in one.
Which sounds like the last name of an action adventure hero, a movie action hero, Chris Ruocchio. If it weren't already taken by Sylvester Stallone's famous boxer character, that would be awesome. Uh,
That was some NPR stuff right there. I have to interrupt. Sylvester Stallone's famous boxer. Carry on.
is that is that how an NPR host would announce that?
Yeah, there was a gag. You remember the sitcom Parks and Rec? They did a gag where they sent up the NPR hosts where some doddering old man on the radio says, tries to explain to the audience who Batman is. Everybody knows who Batman is. Oh, he calls himself the Batman. Anyway.
Do your best Ira Glass impersonation. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no. I have the same response.
Yes. Okay, I'm glad you understood those weird guttural noises I made.
We met at FanX. That's the same day I met Kevin Smith also. And I got a picture with Steve Diamond and Larry Correa. So it was a great day all the way around. I had the boldness and foresight of thought to ask Christopher he wanted to come on the show. And then he said yes, he had a book that was releasing in December, but it turns out that actually got pushed back a bit, which is good because then he had some big news that we're going to talk about. And the book got pushed back to coming up in a bit after the show.
No, it's out actually. It only got bumped a couple weeks, so it was still out in December. It was the fifth book in the series. They went from like the first Tuesday to the third Tuesday or something like that.
Oh.
Well, not a big bump, but we made it.
Well, the fifth book in the series just came out in December, so you'll definitely want to check that out.
Yeah, that was Ashes of Man. The fifth book in the Sun Eater series. So I had two out last year. Book 4 came out like last March. So we are between hardback and paperback releases on those. So
that's a good save, seamless save, don't you think, John?
I'm really impressed. I'm just gonna mute myself. I'm gonna sit back and watch you save nonstop.
So I think it's your turn. You can ask a question.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I just want to get more technical stuff out of the way. First of all, welcome so much to the show. It's great to have you here.
No, thanks, man. Glad to be here.
And I caught your website earlier, and I need to put this in the show notes for later, but we'll just start off with your website. Stellar Empire, is that right?
Sollan Empire, Sollan. Yeah. I took the road less traveled by. Everybody goes Terran, so I made it about the sun.
There you go. That's actually pretty clever. SollanEmpire.com. I'm gonna make sure that's in the description later, where I found out some of this information about these books. Fifth book in the series. What did you call the series?
The series is the Sun Eater series. I could not get suneater.com, unfortunately, so I had to improvise. But Sun Eater, it's a space opera, sort of in the tradition of Dune. 20,000 years in the future, galactic empires. Only I've got aliens. Frank skipped the aliens. So, it's been working on this now really since like 2016 is when I sold the first book. But I've been plugging along ever since, so I've done 5 books now. Book 6 will be done in another couple of weeks. 2 novellas, something like 24 short stories. This has been the extent of my my writing credits. Has been working on this series. So,
well, that's good to actually have 6 books under your belt for the series. Your website also mentions novellas and short stories, from which I shamelessly grabbed today's screen grab. I decided to find the least space-like image to use for the cover. It looks like a dwarven ruins.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think I know the one you mean. That was for the cover of a novella called Queen Amid Ashes. I had not planned on publishing it separately. It was in an anthology, and I got an email from my audiobook publisher, Recorded Books, and they were like, "Hey, why didn't you tell us about this? We want to publish it. So, but we want you to, have the ebook, ready to go at the same time." And I told them, well, I was in this anthology. I hadn't really, planned on doing anything with it just yet because you kind of want to give the anthology a little room to breathe. I was allowed to go and reprint it. It was one of my Bane Books anthologies, and those contracts are pretty generous, the short stories. But I hadn't planned on doing anything, so I needed to get an ebook together in like 2 weeks, basically. And so I bought some stock art, and it's not a precise fit. There's a little like dwarf statue on it. I'm planning on updating that in a little bit, but that's what happens when you have 2 weeks to get something together. But that cover should be updated later this year. I'm gonna be relaunching both of those novellas with more appropriate artwork. So
That's a great idea. That was me being a smartass, and now I can't change it because we talked about it in the show. So if I change it, people come back later will know what's going on.
yeah, no, that was totally me cutting corners, which is you caught me. So it was a bit of an awkward situation because actually the anthology that I'd done with Bane is the cover that's my little icon here, which is great. But I couldn't repurpose that for the self-published ebook. That wouldn't be allowed. So here I was stuck, sort of scrambling. But you do what you got to do sometimes, right? So
you've been doing this series from 2016, and sure, I suppose a space opera inspired by Dune is a pretty common starting place for a lot of people. But can you tell us more about the series? Like
yeah.
what is it about? What makes it interesting and different?
Yeah, so like I said, this is set 20,000 years in the future. It is a story of a man called Hadrian, not Adrian, to carry over the Rocky thing there, TW. Totally an accident that happened. But Hadrian is a nobleman in this big galactic empire, and he runs away from home, from his responsibilities. His dad wants him to be a priest. He does not want to do that. And he ends up sort of swept into the middle of this conflict between the human empire and the aliens, the Cielson, who are the first really technologically advanced, technologically capable species that humanity has encountered in all of this time. And so he becomes quite central to this conflict. That takes up most of the series, but the series is written like a memoir. So he's telling the story after this war is over. He tells you on the first page of the first book that he is the man who ended the war and dealt with all the aliens. His story is, a small part his attempt not just to explain, but to justify his actions. He tells you pretty early on he's famous for not only wiping out a star system, collateral damage style, but also for killing the emperor, apparently. And so there is this sort of distance between Hadrian as narrator and Hadrian as character as he's going through the story. And, it's got a bit of everything. We've got space battles, we've got sword fights, we've got weird sort of eldritch horror aliens on the periphery of the story. There's sort of this big cosmic narrative that's all slots into, we've got warring houses, political intrigue, there's even some cyberpunk elements, especially in like the second book. Lots of stuff going on. This is very much my kitchen sink series. This is something I've been working on in some form or other since I was really a kid. I've always wanted to be a writer, and this was always the project I was working on. Of course, when I was little, it didn't look exactly like it does now. It changed significantly over the course of my life, but this has always been my project. And talking about Dune, right? It's absolutely a love letter to Dune, but it's also a response to Dune, right? I am far less cynical about heroes and heroism than Frank Herbert was. I think because they're sort of inevitable. There are inevitably these sort of great figures that let's say straddle history, and you can't really get away from them. So I wanted to sort of acknowledge, Frank Herbert's sense that heroes are dangerous, they can be catastrophic, but but now what? What do we do with that? So I wanted to go from there. So if you like that sort of old school so-called new wave space opera, it's very much in that tradition, but it's I guess a bit more maybe more character driven is maybe the right phrase. Not that Dune isn't, but it's all in this guy's head, right? You're very close to the protagonist, which is I think a little bit different than a lot of the other sort of tentpoles in the genre.
And that's a great description. From a technical standpoint, because it's written as the memoir of this hero, then you don't have Dune's omniscient narrator. You're necessarily dealing with the what's the term? Oh, I almost had the term on the tip of my tongue. Unreliable. He's not
Unreliable?
necessarily unreliable. He's not necessarily unreliable, but he's not omniscient either.
Right. Yeah. And I had someone ask me this question. Was it this morning? I had a letter from somebody who was asking about Hadrian being unreliable. And I think the tendency is to look at first-person narrators and say this guy is a liar just by default. And I don't know where that comes from in science fiction fans. But I tend to think that Hadrian is less unreliable and just more limited, right? He is, just like you and me, his perceptions of events and things are not necessarily 100%. So this is something I've been exploring with the novellas and the short stories, is revisiting episodes from this really long series from a different point of view, and things, at least, people's motivations not 100% lining up. So, you see this a lot with historical documents, right? We have, I think, like 4 biographies of Alexander the Great written, not during his lifetime, but a couple hundred years later, and they don't line up on the details either. So figuring out what happened is, in part about triangulating, one events between like one version of the story and another. So this has been sort of a fun experiment to play with in writing the sort of tie-in stories. I'm a big admirer of Gene Wolfe, and Gene Wolfe is so big on point of view and perception in his writing, not just in Book of the New Sun, but in Fifth Head of Cerberus and all this other stuff. And so being able to sort of get at objective truth, right? We talk about truth in fiction, whatever, right? You know what I mean? Canon, if you will, what actually happened, by having to sort of do a little work there and a little thinking around what the characters are saying, I think is rewarding and kind of fun. It's this sort of extra little puzzle on top of just the normal storytelling. So.
Every person comes to a situation with their own perspective, their own personality, their own training. I mean, if you have someone who is, let's just say, a fashion designer, what they notice when they come to a situation, you've got 10 people standing around not doing anything. What they notice when they come to that situation is going to be different than what a soldier will notice when they come to that situation, or what a woman would notice when they come to that situation. And it's not that a narrator is lying, it's that they all come to that with their own experiences, and that's what first person means, is you're seeing it through the eyes of the character. And even close third person, you're seeing it through the eyes of the character.
No, absolutely.
And yeah, I know there's a lot of unreliable narrators who are liars, but that's a very, very particular tiny subset of first person writing.
No, I think that's right, but I do think that people have this tendency to just conflate the first person narrator with lying. And I don't know if that's our culture, as someone said in the comments, or if that is just an expectation that genre fiction readers bring to that sort of style. Maybe that's the fault of earlier writers who sort of take advantage of that sort of trick to hide something from their audience, because it is super tempting, right? And you should, as a writer, use all the tools at your disposal and even the medium at your disposal to sort of mess with people. I remember, this is a completely different example, but there was a Doctor Who radio drama I listened to back in the day where the big twist was the voices that you've been hearing for the last 2 hours that sounded exactly like the Doctor and his companions were in fact copies that were like spider robots that had their personalities imprinted on them by the Doctor, and like 100 years earlier as a failsafe in case the civilization of these spider robots like went awry again. So you couldn't see, right, that they weren't the Doctor because you were listening to a radio drama. So it took the format that the story was in and used that against you, which is, the sort of very clever thing. You were talking about BioShock earlier too, right? BioShock very famously uses the fact that this is a video game against you by having the sort of tutorial help me character, right? Actually have been mind controlling you the whole time, right? So you, by following the game's instructions to play the game, you have been participating in the plot twist, which is really fun. And so you can do stuff like that with first person. But I think that has led people to assume that that's always going on. So I get a lot of people who are saying, oh, we can't trust Hadrian. I'm like, well, you mostly can, right? You can trust him about as much as you trust any person, to remember things accurately. So, but yeah, no, it is in the case of Hadrian, at least, like you say, he's limited because he's a guy, and he doesn't always understand, his brother or his friends or something like that.
Got it. We got some great comments along those lines. As you mentioned, Video Mirador mentioned trust and culture. Jeff Rowe Johnson doesn't recall. I don't recall the assumption that everybody would necessarily be unreliable. Fiona Wolf echoes what Daddy Warpig says. Fiona Wolf's a big fan, by the way. She had a great description of your Sun Eater series before.
Oh yeah, no, I remember Fiona Wolf from my Twitter days. Good to see you. Yeah, no, good. There are a few familiar names. I saw Sir Galahad, who is a regular over on my channel. Good to see you too, man. So.
Yeah, we've got lots of the folks that show up live. Absolutely love the guests, and there's usually an overlap with these folks hanging out and our authors and creators. Fiona Wolf did have a question earlier. I'm going to try to go way back in chat. She queued up a question for you earlier. Do you have any idea? I think you sort of answered this earlier. Is Baen going to republish your older Sun Eater books?
Yeah, so they would like to. I talked to Tony Weisskopf about this, and that would be the best situation, because when you jump ship mid-series, it's usually next to impossible. That's not to say it hasn't been done to get somebody to pick up the last 2 books in a series. Has happened with me. It can be done. Obviously, I did it, but ideally you get to resell the whole series and reprint those. But the problem is that the first 5 books are selling just fine, and so DAW doesn't want to give them up, and so they are stuck. They're over with DAW for the foreseeable future. DAW is going to be bringing out trade paperbacks, but until such time as those rights revert, they will be DAW's books, and they're doing just fine by those 5 books. So, we'll see. Maybe one of these days, the rights will revert. Baen will pick them up, and we'll do a reprinting of all 7 at that time. Probably they'll look different when that happens. We'll do some new art or something. But for the foreseeable future, those first 5 are going to stay with DAW, and it'll just be 6 and 7 over with Baen. So. I know that means it'll be hard for everybody to get a set that matches exactly, for which I apologize. But, it can only do so much under the circumstances.
So now that we've come to it, do you want to talk about the switch over to Baen?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. I guess what do you want to know? I guess brief overview. I had a contract for 4 books originally. I signed that back in 2016. Around the time book 3 came out, which was in 2020, it became pretty obvious I needed a little bit more than that, so I got them to renew the contract for 5 books, and then I turned book 4 in, and book 4 was huge. These books are too long. Book 4 was like 300,000 words, which is like, I don't want to be writing them this long, but this is sort of the format for the series at this point, so I'm trapped. But they told me, hey, this is too long. Paper got very expensive thanks to the unspecified virus. And so we need you to split it. Penguin says they can't be longer than 200,000 words. So they made me split my 4th book into 2 volumes. This was, of course, after it was all written, which was very exciting and very fun. And so book 4 turned into Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man, which is how I had 2 large novels come out last year. Had to do some editing to get those 2 books to work on their own. And even still, they're a little bit non-standard for the series. Traditionally, there is a very large sort of time jump between each book. Books 4 and 5, as a consequence of the split, do not have that. They're kind of A side, B side of the same story, really. So I had, at that point, I had 1 novel outstanding, at least from a writer's standpoint, and I wasn't sure if that was going to be 1 or 2 books. Because it was very likely that the same sort of length limitation was going to be imposed on me. So I was sort of assuming it was going to be 2 books. I talked to them and said, hey, what's the deal going to be? And they said, basically, like, we don't know yet. We'll get back to you. And there wasn't a lot of communication on that front, but I needed to get work done, so I started working on it. And we went back and forth. I eventually was told, nope, this is going to be 1 book, and it needs to be 200,000 words, right? So the length limitation was staying, but wrap the story up and move on. And I'd already written about 200,000 words at that point, and I was nowhere near the end. And I am not super thrilled about having to throw out months of work because I had not had an answer communicated to me. And so I went back and forth with them most of last year trying to get that situation resolved. And I eventually came to the point where it became pretty obvious that we weren't gonna get anywhere. Sort of an unstoppable force, immovable object issue. I'm not sure which one of those I was, but in any case, I used to work for Baen Books. I had been junior editor there for like 7 years. So I had dinner with Toni Weisskopf, and she said, so what? They've got you on contract for 1 more book? And I said, not technically. When they split the book, they burned out my contract on that 5th book. So she was like, well, I'll just take them then. So that's what happened. And she said I could have the 2 books I needed to finish the series, in the format and style that it had been going on. Because it'd be weird if 5 books into a series suddenly went down to like 1/3 of the length, right? And people will be mad, and that's you don't want to upset your customers. So you need to keep them in the lifestyle to which they have become accustomed as readers. So anyway, Baen came in and rescued the series. So book 6, Disquiet Gods, will be out probably around this time next year, maybe a little bit later, maybe more like March, April. It'll be finished the next month or so. So.
Oh, that's outstanding. I'm glad you were able to get yourself a soft landing, soft-ish.
Me too. And I owe Baen a lot. I worked for them, like I said, for years and years, but and of course that relationship was partly what made the landing possible. But I really really grateful to Toni and the team for taking me on. It is hard to take on a big series sort of midway through. It is hard for a traditional publisher to do that, just because of the way that they need to print in large batches and things like that. It can be sort of complicated, and the returns aren't. It's not like picking up a first novel, right? First novels sell the best. So it's a little bit of a bit of a risk for them, but the series continues to do better and better and reach more and more people. So I'm very excited about the future of it all. So
That's amazing, and it's actually, frankly, it's amazing to hear you having so much success with traditional print. books? Do you see a lot of action online with the Amazons and the Kindles?
Oh yeah. No, so my sales are probably about 50-50 digital and print in the US at least. I found that looking at my European statements that the Brits and the Continentals tend to read print versus digital at a much higher rate than we Americans, which I think is really interesting. But it's about half and half. Particularly once the paperbacks became available. Obviously, traditional publishing is a lot less, let's say, dynamic on pricing, and so that causes the ebooks to be very expensive when only the hardback is out. But once the paperback comes out and the prices drop, that really breathes some new life into things, and that kind of brings the print release up to parity with the digital, because the digital will run a little bit ahead in the hardcover when it's just the hardcover that's out. But of course, it behooves us as writers to have the book out in as many formats as possible to reach as many people. So, I'm glad to have, all of the formats out there. So that's good. But yeah, no, I've been pretty happy with traditional publishing, sort of in general, at least as far as income and sales go. I've done some indie stuff on the side as well. Those novellas, my short story collections, those are indie published. So I find that doing sort of both things is very good, especially because traditional publishing only really pays you out twice a year, or when you hand over a new book. So it helps to have more regular income, if only to convince the bankers that you're good for loans and things.
Smooth that curve a little bit.
Yeah. So, but no, I try to do a bit of everything. So.
Sounds like you are doing it right. Unless Daddy Warpig has more questions on that line, I'd like to go back a little bit to hear a little bit more about yourself. You said that this setting was a dream since you were a child, and I don't think that's uncommon, for boys and girls to dream about things and eventually turn that into something. We don't usually do it, but what? Gosh, I hate asking this question. So what about it? Like, what in your childhood, what triggered these particular dreams, or what specifically did you want to get in the stories that you ended up putting in there?
Yeah, well, I don't know about like specific things, right? But I was a Star Wars kid. I like to, I like to joke that I was basically the last kid in America who grew up with the like original Star Wars, right? Because my dad had the laser discs of the original trilogy, so I watched the unLucased versions up through the release of the prequels, even, and so I'm just old enough to where I was able to have that sort of pre-Phantom Menace Star Wars, experience as a kid. Of course, I was also the right age to not think the prequels were that terrible. I recognized that they were not great, but I was young enough to enjoy the lightsaber fights and John Williams turning in his career best music and pod racing and all that, right? So, I grew up with that. I grew up with video games and Tolkien. I read, I think The Hobbit was one of the first books that I read ever. I was reading pretty young, so I think I must have read that when I was like 3 or 4, which I know sounds preposterous, but I was reading pretty early. And my parents, I couldn't manage the Lord of the Rings though, of course. So my parents got me the audiobooks, and they were the only, and I had the CDs, so I listened to, and they were the only audiobooks I owned. So I listened to the old Rob Inglis Lord of the Rings audiobook recordings like literally 100 times. From the age of like 6 to, well, still. And so it was this sort of weird mixture, that really made me want to tell stories. In the first place, a strange, combination of like Tolkien and JRPGs and Star Wars, which is perhaps not that strange, right, in our corner of the world. But I was the only kid really in my relatively small Catholic school that was really into this stuff, at least in my class. I had some friends who were like a grade above me, but because of that, I was the weird kid, and I was always doing my world building on the backside of my math notes. So you'd open my binders, and it would be math gibberish on one side and actual gibberish on the other, and that just sort of continued. I was trying to write like a fantasy book as early as middle school. And I finished a draft of something that's maybe 200 pages around that time. It's totally unreadable, but I was serious about it. This is something I worked on, like all the time, which and I never really thought I would do anything else. And so I very foolishly went and got an English degree because I didn't know what else I was supposed to do with myself. And that at least turned into the Bain job. So I think I was the only English degree holder I knew at the time who had a job in English. So, so there was
That's
that
saying
to be
something
grateful
for real.
No.
That's saying something for real. That's outstanding.
Hey, I don't like that insult. English majors is a perfect entry position to a wonderful career in any fast food restaurant you care to name.
I knew that's where you were going. Oh man, yeah, no, it's very true. It was. I tend not to recommend that people do the same thing. If you're going to spend that much money to go into indentured servitude, you should really pick something that might get you out of that bondage. I got very lucky because I sold I sold the book about 2 weeks after I graduated, and and so that helped sort of smooth things over a ways because, of course, had that and some foreign sales really helped to get me out of my bad decisions. But that doesn't happen for a lot of folks. So I recognize I really was blessed in that department. So
No arguments here. Yeah, that's a tough road to go. I know people who've done English and anthropology and sociology, and it's all just mountains of debt for very little benefit. But I think I love hearing the success story because that's what half of English majors want or more. They want to have a some success as an author or a writer,
sure.
And if enough of them get their heads out of the clouds or out from in between their pillows, then they'll come up with something good that people like instead of trying to write quote unquote great literature. Um, Along the same lines, Jeff was talking, and you were talking about reading Lord of the Rings in school. Lord of the Rings is great, but it's not necessarily for uh, you know kids or little kids. You need a few years of reading practice to get into it. But then think of all the hours you spend in school and in English courses being force-fed awful so-called quote-unquote literature. I mean, just to pick on everybody's favorite redheaded stepchild, nobody needs to read Catcher in the Rye ever, right?
Yeah, well, the other real problem with English curricula, right, is they also do share great literature with you, but it's being shared to you often by people who hate that literature or who are disinterested in it. I remember having several teachers who had a very adversarial relationship with the fact that they had to teach Shakespeare, and I think Shakespeare is awesome. You may disagree, but I do like. There's no reason that you can't make a story about witches and a king and his wife plotting to murder, or I guess a Thane plotting to murder the king. Boring. Like I don't know how English teachers manage to do that. It's actually awesome, and so they are constantly signaling that what they're teaching you is worthless. And in some cases, it definitely is. But in other cases, they're like ruining. I don't know. They're ruining Macbeth for you, which is really a criminal offense. and it's a tragedy. So,
Amen. You mentioned amongst your influences, and I'm going to zero in on this. You mentioned JRPGs, which is sort of typical for our cohort here. So I was wondering if you could tell me, do you like what are your gaming influences?
oh sure. So I was never a big Final Fantasy guy, which I know gets me in a lot of trouble. But I really liked the Tales series, weeby though it is. Tales of Symphonia was huge for me. It came out in like 2005, so I was in middle school. So that's a great one. I was a Nintendo kid up through the Xbox 360, so I wasn't able to get a lot of the sort of the big name stuff. This is why I probably am not a Final Fantasy guy, because it was sort of in that awkward window where
Yeah,
Nintendo and Square,
PlayStation owned it all that time.
yeah, they'd gone splits after the N64 PS1 divide, right? So I had Tales. There was also very excited about this because Nintendo just announced they were remastering this series, Batten Kaitos for the GameCube. Kind of an obscure deep cut, but I love those two games. They're great. They're they're one of those like card buildy things where you build your deck you build your moves in a deck of cards basically, and it otherwise plays kind of like a turn-based sort of Final Fantasy-esque thing, but your moves are built into this deck, right? But the world building is super cool. It's this sort of weird mashup of like Mesoamerican and Italian Renaissance, and the whole world looks kind of like watercolor painted, and it's just great. The writing is excellent. The voice acting is terrible, but the writing is excellent.
That's kind of traditional, is it?
Oh
Isn't
yeah,
it?
no, you're like, would you want it any other way?
I mean, that's how you know it's a legitimate JRPG. Is
Right. It's the high quality stuff, right? It's yeah, it's the bitter with the sweet. But
Resident Evil started going downhill when they started getting good voice acting.
yeah, you lose the meme quality, right? And that's what you're really signing up for. I I've been playing the latest Tales game recently because I realized it was on PC, which I finally got a good computer. And the voice acting is pretty much good across the board, and I find that I'm just not shouting the dumb attack names. And maybe that's because I'm not 14 and think it's as silly as I used to, but it's certainly missing something with regard to the cheese factor that the old games had. But those are great. I really liked Lost Odyssey too. Speaking of Xbox games, if anyone's ever played that, it's sort of the bastard sibling of Final Fantasy, because I can't remember his name, but the guy who went off and founded Mistwalker from Square. It was sort of his off-brand Final Fantasy game, and it's tremendous. There's a bunch of short stories. Like one of the unlockables in that game are like just straight up short stories about the main character that was written by some Japanese novelist whose name also escapes me. But it's about this immortal soldier and his quest to try and get his family back together. And there's like an evil wizard. It's also very cool world building. It's kind of got an industrial revolution thing going on, but in that distinctly JRPG way, right? Where it's still, it's the industrial revolution, but everybody's fighting with like, swords, and there are these like sort of imperial walkers that are resurrecting troops on the battlefield in sort of mass production numbers. It's great. That's a really great game. No, sorry, I could talk about random JRPGs at length, so I'll shut up.
No, this is a pleasant surprise. The JRPG is its own particular beast, like you mentioned, the weird stories and the weird world building and the awful voice acting. It's got its charms for sure. I was a big Final Fantasy guy. I switched over to the PlayStation with everybody else, but there's no lack of influence in those games on my part. You might have picked this up earlier, but I'm also a huge tabletop guy. Uh, do you do any real life gaming, role playing games, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so that's one I have never really gotten into, to be honest with you. I had some friends who tried to get me into it in high school, but they were also the friends who like deliberately tried to like mess with the other players because they thought it was funny, and so we couldn't ever really get anything done, and I just like never had fun. And so it's something as I've gotten older, I've just never really circled back to. My wife's a big fan. She's got like a Discord group she does. I think it's D&D with, I can't remember which game. It might be a different system, but in any case, it's never really been my thing.
Well, I tell you what, all the cool kids are taking their fun fantasy IPs and making games out of it, tabletop war games and role playing games out of it.
Oh, sure.
So hook up with the spouse and talk to her about doing a Sun Eater uh, space traveling adventure game. You'd get Jeffro's attention for sure.
Oh, I've thought about it. It's on the long list of projects. I've got a secret project I'm working on right now. I will tell you, it's not a tabletop game, but I'm ramping up to trying to do more stuff to support the, to support the writing. Let's say. So one of these days, certainly not out of the question.
I love to hear it. We are coming up about 5 minutes left in the show. We don't have to stop, but I'm just letting everybody know live. Daddy Warpig, what you got left for any questions or anything interesting you want to ask?
So, are the sixth and seventh books going to be, as was planned with Daw, just the 300,000 words of the sixth book kind of playing out, or is the sixth book going to be 300,000 and the seventh book going to be another 300,000?
Yeah, gosh, I hope they're not going to be quite that long. But no. So, because I had this sort of premonition that they were going to pull the split game on me again, I sort of just planned on them being 2 books. And so when I did my outline, I'm a pretty big outliner. I found a bunch of old Dave Drake outlines at the Bain office when I was working there. I was like, oh, this is the thing I'm missing. This is what I should do to be, a real writer. And so I've outlined pretty thoroughly ever since. I outlined both books 6 and 7 as sort of separate books. And then they told me, hey, it needs to be smushed together. And so I sort of just went back to my original plan once the Bane thing was sort of cleared up, basically. So they will each be, they aren't going to be shorter than books 4 and 5, but hopefully they are not as long as book 3, which is currently the longest one in the series. I think that was about 290,000, 285, something like that, which is very long. And if I had any sense, they would be a third that size, and the series would just be a lot longer. Of course, the trouble there is that traditional publishing doesn't do very well with like 15-book series anymore, for one reason and another. But yeah, so the point is we're looking at probably 250,000 word novels to finish out the series, and that'll be it for Hadrian, at least. If not for the setting, I'm not leaving the setting for the foreseeable future.
So one reason is thrones, and the other one is killing kings. But anyways, are you? That's a lot of work to come. So this may be entirely jumping the gun more than a little bit. Are you looking to, or have any notions of the future beyond that?
Oh, sure. I have probably about a dozen different little like 1-page treatments I've written up for different things that I want to do, either in the universe or in the universe, but so far removed from it that the casual observer wouldn't be able to figure it out. Or in its own thing. There's a fantasy series I'd like to do at some point. I don't think that'll be next. But I've got some sort of sorcery stuff, some sort of planet stuff. I've got some more sort of standalones in the Sun Eater universe that I'd like to do as well. My sort of rule of thumb has been that if I can fit a project in the Sun Eater timeline anywhere, then I'll do it, rather than make it its own thing, because then that sort of connection is fun, right? We sort of build the canon, build the universe. That sort of stuff is really fun for me to find the sort of deep associations between one book and another, the little cameos, Easter eggs, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, no. So that'll be coming. I think I'll probably be done with book 7 around the end of the year, because book 6 really is almost done. I've got some short stories I need to do and another novella that I need to write sort of in the middle of the year, but by New Year's, I should be about finished. So it's not that much more work. I can crank out one of these giant books about once a year. So we shouldn't be too much longer.
That sounds great. And once a year is pretty fast for the big books.
Yeah. It would probably, I'd be better served if I were writing, two more reasonably sized novels a year, at least from like a financial standpoint. Because the rule of thumb in indie publishing, right, is that you want to write sort of shorter. You want to write like 50,000 to 80,000, maybe 120 at the top end. And if you can get like 2 or 3 of those out a year, maybe even faster than that, you're sort of playing the algorithm, right? I'm not super well versed in how you do all of that, because I'm not like one of those like lit RPG sort of machine guys, right? How they do what they do at speed, I have no idea. But it's true in trad too. If you can get more frequent releases, that's good for the sales team, that's good for the backlist, that's good for everybody. So I plan on moving away from the giant, the giant doorstop novel after this series. Having played that game long enough, I think. So we'll be changing up the format a little bit.
I love it. Well, I think we're just about done for today, but it has been amazing talking to you. Thanks so much for being on the show. I'm going to open it up to you, Chris Ruocchio. Last words. What do you want to say? What do you want to talk about?
Well, I just wanted to say, thanks for having me. And if folks want to check out the books, the first one is Empire of Silence. It's on Amazon. It's at Barnes and Noble. It's available, basically wherever books are sold. You can check out my website, which is sollanempire.com, SOLLAN empire.com. And I am on YouTube here as well, over at Sun Eater Books. And so I hope to see some of y'all around. But yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Outstanding, and I'll make sure everybody knows about those links in the show notes later. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and I really appreciate everybody in chat. You've got a lot of fans, and probably a few more fans now. And I hope everybody listening later takes a look. Enjoyed the conversation and goes checks out your stuff, your site, your books, your YouTube channel. That's been great. It's been a great show, and special thanks to my co-host, Daddy Warpig. The floor is yours.
Wait, it's my turn?
It sure is.
Go! What am I gonna say? I have no idea. I'll just have to wing it. I want to thank everybody who came in to listen live, participated in the chat. We love all of you, of course, and I want to thank everybody who listens later. All the people we pick up during the week who download us from the Google Play Store, the iTunes Store, and from SoundCloud.com. We are available on the device of your choice to listen on the web or just to download your PC. And we're signing out for today, folks. But don't you worry. Don't you fret. We will be back.